Hi, Helene. How are you?
I'm good. Tanya?
Yes,
Oh,
nice
it's
to see you.
yes, you too. Thank you.
So I think we've got about 6 minutes.
Okay.
My tech person says I will have to confirm with her when we are both ready to go so that she can push it live on FeedLoop. So we should wait till 2:30 and then she'll push it live and then our people will be able to see it on the conference website.
Okay. And they're joining on Zoom though, right? The participants?
They might be joining on Zoom or they might be just watching it on FeedLoop. It's been a little bit of both. There's a prompt down below to join on Zoom, but they can watch it on FeedLoop if they don't want to transfer over to Zoom.
Okay.
So
Okay. All right.
you'd rather them be on Zoom though, right?
I would. Well, in part because there's an activity and I do need someone I'm looking for 2 volunteers to participate in this to really practice this technique and to demo it. But if they opt not to, we'll just skip the technique and I've got an example of what I'm talking about that I'll put in the chat, but I've got a bunch of items for the chat too. So I was going to pop them all in the Zoom chat, but I don't know how to transfer them all over to FeedLoop.
I can do that. I can copy and paste them.
Awesome.
Yeah,
okay,
that's no problem at all.
Thank you.
Yeah, and yeah, I'm asking Kate actually to encourage people to migrate over to the Zoom so that hopefully, yeah, she's gonna share the link. Okay. When I try to have both FeedLoop and Zoom open at the same time, I get feedback, so I can only do one at a time.
Got it.
I was trying that earlier with an earlier session and it was like, whoa, what's going on? I'm getting like double voices. And it was just like, no, I gotta close FeedLoop because I have to be on Zoom. So
awesome.
Yeah.
And then Tanya, I'll have access to share my screen too. Is that right? So I can share this.
Yes, I think you are the host. Let me make sure you're the host. That would be good. Let's see. Yep, make co-host.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, so that way you can share.
Awesome. Okay, good. I see it right now. Beautiful. All right. So how are you doing? You've got my goodness, how you all have done this is just incredible.
In the last session, I was keeping track of one of them, but then I couldn't help myself. I started clicking and it's like, you can click in between the sessions and go from one to the other. And then they all migrate over to on demand. So I can watch them tonight or whenever. The technology is cool.
It's amazing. It is. I mean, it's just incredible.
I'm gonna get so much more out of camp.
Exactly. Yes. And I was thinking, I was like, man, I know it would have been more helpful and to have everyone do the pre-recording. And I was like, oh shoot, I should just have done this and given it. But I have a journalist joining us at 3:05 to do a quick lightning talk. And I gave her name to Smirty just to make sure to Kate, her name is Smirty, to make sure she comes in. But I was like, this is incredible. And I was watching the videos just in terms of how to do this and how people can go back and forth, check everything out. I mean, it's really unbelievable what you've done, what your team has done.
Well, I will keep an eye on the participants window. I don't know if people have to be admitted, but I can definitely handle that part.
Okay, great. Yeah, she'll be here about 3:05. I told her that's when I would need her.
Okay. And I'm actually Kat is our tech support person.
Okay.
Can you post the link to the Zoom on FeedLoop for the Complicating the Narratives panel? We want people on Zoom if possible. My chat box doesn't like FeedLoop. It keeps changing it to FeedLoop.
FEED.
Yeah. Come on, chat, get with it. And then I'm supposed to be monitoring. Oh, can I make yours live? Presenters ready. Okay, I'm going to actually go off camera. I'm going to stop my video.
Okay.
Are you ready to go?
Yeah, all set.
Do you want me to introduce you, or do you want to just start talking?
Oh, I'm all good. I'll introduce myself. That's fine.
All right, cool. I'm going to tell her to go ahead and push this live.
All right, so I will go ahead and share then. Does that sound good?
Give her 1 minute.
Okay. Yeah, so you'll give me a heads up when we're rolling.
Yes.
Cool. Thank you.
You can go on.
All right. Awesome. Well, hello, everybody. It is a pleasure to be here. I'm putting a bunch of items for you in the chat, which is not letting me do that for some reason, but we do have chat items and I will get these to you at some point. But I just want to welcome all of you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll get rolling. And then Tanya, if there's any chance that I can have access to the chat, that would be fantastic because I got about 10 different resources to share with everyone. All right, let's see. Let me try this one more time. And thank you all for your patience. I'm just gonna get this set up. All right. All right, we are ready to roll. All right, thank you everyone for joining. All right, so I do not have access for some reason to the chat. So I'm gonna be listing a bunch of different resources, but I will get them to you. I can assure you of that. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen so we can get rolling and make the most use of our time here. It's a pleasure to be here and I appreciate you joining me and thanks for coming over to Zoom. I know that some of you are on feed loop, so I appreciate you joining me here because we have an interactive activity. So if it works that we can do it and a few people can come off camera or come on camera, I should say, and join us, fantastic. If it doesn't, no problem. I've got the resources to send you for that as well. So again, welcome. This is Complicating the Narratives, and this session is focused on how we can report in and on a polarized world without causing more division. So my name is Len Hofer, and I am the manager of Complicating the Narratives at Solutions Journalism Network. And just a little bit about my background. I'm a broadcast journalist. I spent a lot of time in television and radio, specifically most of my career in public media, but also in commercial TV at CBS. And I'm coming to you from one of my very favorite cities in the US, and that is Rochester, New York. So if any of you get here, I hope that you will look me up and let me know. So I appreciate that. And if there are any questions that might come up during this time together, just you can pop it in the chat or people will keep me honest in terms of what's happening in feed loop so we can get to those questions as well. All right, so we have a few goals for our time together today. And the first is that you'll understand what it means when we say this phrase, complicating the narratives. What in the world is that about? So we'll talk about that in some depth and we'll explain why this journalistic approach is really essential when it comes to our coverage of divisive issues. We want you to walk away with a few techniques and also some strategies that you yourselves can start incorporating in your work when it comes to coverage of contentious issues. So we will accomplish those goals by just doing a very brief introduction to Complicating the Narratives. And then I'll spend some time walking us through the 4 pillars. So the pillars are really the building blocks of Complicating the Narratives. And we'll go through a few of the corresponding strategies connected to those pillars. And then you will also hear, I have a lightning talk planned for you in the latter half of this session. You'll hear from one of my colleagues in news, and she'll explain really how everything that you're hearing about, how it translates to real world and how journalists are using it. And then finally, we'll end with a brief recap of our time today, and I'll give you my contact info so you can feel free to reach out to talk through anything that we didn't get to during our time together. So I know that I have a lot packed into the next 50 minutes, and you are getting a condensed version of a 4-hour newsroom and journalist training. So I mention that, and I share one of my favorite characters of all time from television, from Schitt's Creek with you, because I want you to be kind to yourselves and when it comes to this learning process. And I also want you to know that I am a resource for you after this session comes to an end. So I want you to feel free again, and I will continue to urge you to reach out to me so I can answer any questions that you might have. So because we have a packed agenda, we're going to move along pretty quickly. But again, you can pop some questions in the chat or feel free to email me and we'll set up a one-on-one call. All right, so here we go. In 2018, I'm going to give you a little bit of the backstory, some context to this initiative before we jump in. So in 2018, Solutions Journalism Network commissioned some groundbreaking research and a powerful essay by a journalist and writer by the name of Amanda Ripley. And it was titled Complicating the Narratives. And the research and the corresponding essay, it showed how journalists can learn from strategies used by conflict mediators, diplomats, psychologists, hostage negotiators, and how they can use the strategies that they employ in their work when it comes to really telling more nuanced and inclusive reporting on divisive issues. So since the publication of that original essay that went on our blog, what we've done really as an organization is work to promote and train and support journalists in really taking these concepts and these strategies to embrace complexity and to navigate discussions with individuals who hold competing views and show them the many ways in which they can do that. So in short, complicating the narratives is a journalistic practice, and it draws from the experience of experts in conflict. And what it does is it requires that we as journalists slow down our approach. And it really asks that we as journalists intentionally practice deep listening. And I'm talking about deep listening with our sources. And that we seek to tell more nuanced stories when we're reporting on controversial issues. So we're talking about stories that illuminate, stories that generate understanding about some of these complicated issues, and not stories that cause further divides. And we do it through these 4 pillars. So we do it by listening differently, by going beneath the problem, by embracing complexity rather than seeking simplicity in our coverage, and by countering confirmation bias. So countering confirmation bias in our interviews and also in our reporting. So from our research, we developed a training curriculum for journalists and newsrooms focused on these 4 pillars. So why in the world is Solutions Journalism Network leading this work? So for those of you that may not be familiar with solutions journalism, in short, it's the rigorous reporting on responses to social problems. And to really to effectively report on problems, we have to understand, what's going on with this issue. What's underlying, where's there, what do we need to understand about this? We've got a little bit of feedback if someone can go on mute, unless that's me, but I don't think it is. But that being said, complicating the narratives when done right, it strengthens our solutions journalism reporting because it does 2 things. First, it provides greater context. And then second, it provides a deeper understanding to the problems in our society. And what happens is those 2 things, they really do open the door when it comes to examining potential responses. So we know that we cannot seek responses. We can't really look for solutions unless we have first identified and have a clear understanding of the problem. And complicating the narratives really does enable us to do just that. So with that, I'm going to jump right in to pillar 1, which is focused on listening differently. So what prevents us from listening? And if you really think about it, when we're listening during an interview or a conversation. There are a number of things that are competing for our attention at any given time, at any moment. And we're talking about the external things, such as you see here, but also internal things and internal dialogues. So what is it that prevents us from listening? Deadlines. I mean, deadlines can make it really difficult. We need to move things along quickly in the course of the interview that we're doing. Sometimes it's preconceived notions about our source. We might think that we have them figured out already. And so that kind of turn in a way that makes us tune out just a little bit because we're kind of making assumptions about what it is that they might share. Being overly focused on our list of questions, which sometimes if we are on deadline, we've got a lot on our plate and we're making multiple phone calls or we're jumping on a variety of different, Zoom interviews, it can be really hard to just explore an interview, and we need to get these questions answered. I say hangry. I always hangry is a daily occurrence for me. And that is one thing that causes me to stop listening because I need to eat. Sometimes we do not enough interview prep, maybe just again, because of time demands. That might prevent us from listening really well. Other times too much interview prep. So we might think as we know exactly what the source will say. And then lastly, distractions. And this is something that we all deal with. So whether it's a text message that pops up, as a Slack notification, an email notification, those are things that can really prevent us from listening. I want you to check out this quote on the impact of quality listening. And I will complete the rest of it for you. So in this state, people may become aware of various aspects of themselves which were previously suppressed due to psychological defense mechanisms. So the key point here with listening is when we're interviewing a source and that source is entrenched in a particular worldview, and we say to them, now that I understand your perspective, will you hear out a counter viewpoint, a different angle that may not align with your own, and respond to it? And if we ask that of our source, that person needs to feel heard first. They have to feel heard first before they will ever be willing to open themselves up to listening or to considering information that differs from their viewpoint, information that's counter to their beliefs. So one way we can do that, one way we can help them feel heard and also open them up to, listening to and responding to viewpoints that counter their own, is through a technique called looping. So looping was developed by the Center for Understanding and Conflict. And this is a technique, it's been used by conflict mediators really for decades when it comes to working with individuals that are entrenched in controversy. And what's really awesome about this tool is that it is applicable to the work that we do as journalists. It works for us as well. So when a journalist loops during an interview, what happens is they give their source really the space to share and to reflect and to think and to dig deeper. And looping helps us to really generate clarity and also develop a deeper understanding of the person that we're talking with, and an understanding about how they feel about the issue that we're exploring in a story. So at its core, looping is all about deep listening. And this is how you do it. And I'm going to, again, I've got the resources, so I'm going to send this to you so you'll have this as a PDF. We'll make this available to you. So there are 4 steps to this technique. And the first is that you just listen. You listen and try to understand what your source is saying. And then you communicate back to them in just a few words what you understood. And you do this in language that conveys understanding. And then you wait. First you check in to make sure you got it right. So you ask them, is this right? Is my understanding of how you're feeling, what you experienced, is it correct? And then you wait. You ask them and wait to see what their response is. If you got it right, so if you loop correctly, they'll let you know. And they'll say something like, yes, exactly, that's it. If you didn't, they'll either explicitly say, no, that's not right, or they might say something like, yeah, that's about right, or that's kind of it, or they might mumble with their words, and that's an indicator that we missed something. It may not be that we got it wrong, but it could be in the course of hearing a journalist reflect back to them what we understood. They're getting that chance, as I mentioned, to self-reflect, and they can think about, wait, is that really what I intended to say? Now that I hear it this way, that's really not what I meant. I need to explain it in a different way. So after you've looped effectively and you got it and they've given you the thumbs up, before we jump into our list of the questions, we stay with them in this moment and we follow up with, tell me more. So now that I understand this, will you tell me a bit more about that? And what happens with tell me more is it takes you from this layer, right? So we're going to say, like, this is the first level, the surface level, and it allows you to explore at a deeper level. Tell me more requires that they take the time and dig. That's how you can really excavate some interesting information. So I'm going to quickly go through this one more time. So first, you just listen to understand. And then you share your understanding of what that person said in a few words. You ask them if you got it right. And you wait for their response. If you did, great. You follow up with tell me more. If you didn't, ask them what you missed. Listen, loop again. And then once you get that thumbs up, then at that point you can say, okay, got it. Tell me more about that. Okay. So, question for all of you. Do I have two brave souls that are willing to test this out? And you might say, oh, I have an idea of how this might work, or, I'm curious about it. And you'll come into the center of this virtual circle that we have right now. So we can do just a brief demo. And there are prizes. There are prizes that I will send to you. So will anyone come off mute and jump in? Anyone at all? You just need to.
I'm trying to.
There you are.
Hi, I'll do it.
Oh, great. Okay, tell me your name. I'm sorry, I can't.
Linnea. Sorry, Linnea Crowther.
Linnea?
Yes.
Awesome. Linnea, thank you. Who will join Linnea? Do not leave Linnea alone in the middle of our virtual circle. We do not do that to each other.
I'll join.
Okay, and that is?
I did not have my hair prepared for
No, me neither.
It's all good. It's all good, I promise. All right, so who is the person that said I'll do it?
Lila Goldstein.
Lila?
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Okay, thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, so just quickly, Linnea, Lila, who would like to go first? Actually, no, I'm sorry. Who wants to be the source and who wants to be the journalist?
I'll be the source.
Okay, Lila, you're the source? All right, we're all set. This is what's gonna happen. All right, I'm gonna set this up for you. All right, so Linnea, you are covering a story, and in the course of doing this work, you're actually interviewing other journalists, and you're interviewing them about a time when they got a story wrong. Okay, so this could be a story that they were covering for work, or it could be a story that's personal. So maybe they thought they had an idea about somebody, but once they got to know that person on a deeper level, they realized, oh my gosh, my preconceived notions, caused me to think one thing, and it was an inaccurate narrative. So we're not talking about you got the facts wrong. This is about your preconceived notions. You got them wrong. All right. So Linnea, you're going to be doing this story. And so what's going to happen is Lila, I know this is like truly putting you on the spot to ask you to like think of the story. And it does not have to be like this perfect story. But what's going to happen is you'll take about 30 seconds and share this story. And then what we're going to do is have Linnea loop you. And then you don't worry about if you got it right or wrong. I'm here to help, but we'll kind of see what looping looks like in real time. Does that sound good?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
Awesome. So I am going to switch screens. I'm going to stop sharing just so we can all see you clearly. Okay. We're all set. Let's do it.
Okay. Am I visible? I guess I can't see myself, but okay. So I'm thinking, or does Linnea start with the question?
You can jump
Oh.
right in.
Okay, well, I was just at the panel, Who's Telling Our Story, our stories, which was about journalists, some working abroad, some working in the US, about kind of misconceptions of their communities. And I was thinking, I was thinking about stories that I had done. I've done a couple stories around Ramadan. And one kind of trope that they were talking about is that a lot of stories about Muslim women can be kind of like, oh, a Muslim woman working at a bakery, like almost like it's like the exception. Like it's a good story because it's like there's some element of surprise. And yeah, I mean, I don't know that there's like an actual aspect. I'm thinking about one of the stories like that was exactly like that, but I'm wondering, yeah, like what did I think actually was newsworthy about it? And also just in my newsroom, did I get certain kind of kudos in mostly white newsroom? Oh, like basically just for telling like the most basic story about something happening. So I don't know if I'm, I'd have to think more about it to actually think about what exactly I got wrong, but I think, I think I could have questioned the premise of the story a bit more.
Thank you.
So maybe in covering Ramadan, maybe you didn't have, because that's not something that's in your culture, maybe you didn't have the deep understanding of what would make a story about a community's Ramadan observances newsworthy to other communities.
Yeah, I think so. I'm thinking, I mean, actually I was at a different newsroom, but I think the one I did this year was a little bit more newsworthy because it was about adaptations because of the pandemic. But I'm thinking more about the first story. Yeah, like was the premise like just like Ramadan is happening and this is an example of it. And I'm just not sure that I would have done the same story about Hanukkah or Christmas. Yeah.
So Linnea, so you looped, and
I tried to loop.
before you even got a chance to say, is that right? Lila, she answered. So now let's loop what you just heard said when there was a little bit more information given to you. So loop what you just heard.
So your own experience is more with observances like Christmas or Hanukkah versus Ramadan. Does that sound right?
Well, actually, I actually do have experience. I lived in a Muslim majority country for 2 years, so I do have. I mean, not personal experience observing Ramadan myself, but I think I had some connection, and that was part of maybe my interest in covering it. But certainly not as familiar with all the holidays that I grew up celebrating myself.
So where would you go there?
I don't know. I think you're going to tell us that next, maybe.
No, so do you see, and we'll keep going because I'm watching time, so I realize, but I just wanted, this was a super short way of doing it. And I do have examples of looping in an interview that I'm going to send to you. But in the course of doing it, we learned something that we didn't know from the very beginning. And that's that Lila lived in a Muslim majority country. She was there for a period of time. And so she wasn't completely disassociated from this. So it's interesting where that could go from there. Did you feel as though because of this, and this is when, you looped and you could say, tell me more about that, how that felt for you, considering you had this experience when you lived in a Muslim majority country, and then the way that you're thinking about this now. Can you tell me a little bit more about that, how that feels for you when you think about misconceptions in storytelling and the way in which you told the story? Like kind of, you can use the tell me more to help guide. So take a little bit of a nugget from what was shared and then use it in the course of like going down this journey to see what more you can uncover. But you got more. Like you got more. Like that's the important thing. And it was, I know it might feel as though a small win, but I don't want you to forget that it's a win. That was important. That was important information that we got.
Yeah, I mean, just from my perspective as the source, it's interesting. Like it's thinking about, like times I've, asked questions and realizing like, oh, the person just didn't include something that totally changes maybe your perspective or understanding of the story the first time around. So having the kind of follow up leads to more coming out.
Exactly. You got it. Lenaya, how was that for you? What was that like
It
for
was
you?
good. It was kind of work to figure out how do I loop that exactly. It was certainly more work than referring to my interview questions that I jotted down in advance.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was generative for sure.
It takes time too. And we're talking about using looping, we're thinking about, right, like contentious issues. And this was an example of, like this, we took a piece of a story in a very short period of time, which didn't give you a lot, to go from, but you did it. And you kind of feel as though, and I do this when I loop, like I'm searching sometimes, like I find like, oh man, like sometimes they share so much. What do I choose to reflect back? What do I include? What's important to them? And how does it align with the story that I'm telling? So sometimes it's, where do you feel the emotion? Where do you notice that there's some tension, the way in which they're telling the story? It's kind of using our journalistic gut to pick up on something where we can sense there's something there, and maybe looping that and noting like our other questions that we have that we need to get to, but staying with them in that moment, and then going back to the questions that we have. So I want to say kudos to both of you. If you will, please private chat me your snail mail. So send that to me, because I have I've got Complicating the Narratives reporters notebooks that I will get in the mail to you this weekend. So please, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Being willing to experiment on the fly like that. So I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Cool, thanks.
All right, so I am going to go back to sharing. All right, so great job to both of you. And again, I'll share some resources so you can hear what a looping interview sounds like. But once we've learned how to listen differently through the technique of looping, then we are all set for pillar 2, which is focused on going beneath the problem. So with going beneath the problem, this is really about getting under the conflict, under the tension. And this pillar is totally focused on discovering a person's motivations, their values, their interests. What is it that drives them? And not just focusing on their position. All right, so when we do this, and when we're able to get this information, it really does allow us to paint a more accurate whole picture of a person, a much more complex version or picture of the person that we're interviewing. And so when I say, let's not just focus on positions, but motivations or values or interests, an example might be when it comes to the gun control and the gun control debate. Someone who says, I oppose gun control. That's their position. But the interest or the motivation might be a strong belief in protecting themselves and protecting their family. And so we want to get underneath to uncover that and not just focus on this top level position. And here's how we do it. So we ask different types of questions after we've looped, right? So after the tell me more, when we're ready to start going into our questions, we ask curious questions that really allow us to explore the controversial issues and people's perspectives about those issues at a deeper level. And when I say different questions, I'm talking about our 22 interview questions to complicate the narrative. So these are questions that we crowdsource from journalists in our network, and I will be sharing a link to a PDF so you can see these for yourselves and have them. But we're talking about questions such as, why is this personally important to you? Which life experiences have shaped your views on this issue? For those who disagree with you, what would you like them to understand about you? Imagine for a moment that you got what you wanted in regards to this particular issue. How would your life change? Or what do you want to understand about those with whom you disagree? So these are types of questions that we say challenge caricatures. They're the types of questions that really get people off of their usual talking points And they do elicit more interesting responses. I would say like responses that humanize people, whether we agree with their views or not. So how are we doing so far? Any thoughts, any questions so far with pillars 1 and 2? Anything at all that you'd like to spend just a little bit more time on before we move forward? All right, let me check. Hang on one second. I'm checking the chat. Oh, thank you, Tanya. Yeah, if there are any questions, and I'm going to wait just a moment in case people on feed loop right now that aren't on Zoom have questions, because I know there's a little bit of a delay. So I'll wait to see if there's anything from there. Okay. All right, so we are going to move forward. Again, if anything pops up, feel free to jump off mute or put it in the chat. And if you prefer to save it and email it to me or have a conversation, we can do that as well. All right, so now we're ready for pillar 3, embracing complexity. And this pillar is about resisting the urge to say, here's how side A feels about this conflict. And here's how side B feels. When sometimes there are so many different sides, not just 2. And then here are the facts, and there you have it. That's the story. So what we're talking about with pillar 3 is when we embrace complexity, we're not just focusing on the facts. We're looking at the complex sides of an issue, and we're exploring those sides. And that really is what helps to make stories more interesting, and that's what keeps people curious. It doesn't just keep our audiences curious. I would say it would also keep us as journalists curious as well. And here's how you do it. By acknowledging the complexity of an issue for the audience and explaining to our listeners, our readers, our viewers, this is complicated. There may be, no one way to think through this, no right way to think through this, no easy resolution to addressing this issue. And when we do that, we open our audiences up to learning and to learning more about the different sides and perspectives of the situation that we're covering. We also embrace complexity by looking at an issue from a different lens. And by that, I mean, we can look at a conflict, a controversial issue, and we can look at it from a different geographic location or also a different time in history to help provide some context. In addition, we seek out different perspectives. So I would say, like, when I say different perspectives, I mean cross-cutting identities. So if we're looking at the immigration issue, is there a first-generation immigrant who works for ICE that could, really provide a complex view of something that we're examining? Is there a Catholic who works for Planned Parenthood and just, it could be a part of a story that we're covering when it comes to abortion and abortion rights. So that provides context. And so we're thinking of, these cross-cutting identities and different perspectives that sometimes get overlooked. And these are voices that sometimes are not always considered or explored in a story that can provide some really important information. So when we do these things, we can help break stereotypes through our reporting, and we can tell different types of stories about emotional and really charged issues. So we are going to break this down just a bit further, and I pulled a bunch of headlines for you. So these are all headlines from the past several months, and we're talking about the global protests that launched in late May and early June after the death of George Floyd. So we can embrace complexity through these headlines alone, and we can explore them in a story. So are these anti-police protests? Are they George Floyd protests? Are they anti-racism demonstrations? How in the world do we decide? And who helps us decide? So that's a story that we could do in terms of working to embrace complexity. Like, we could investigate that question. What do we call these protests and why? And in the course of covering that story, just imagine the different perspectives that we could capture, and then all the stories behind those perspectives. And we could take it a step further, or a news outlet could take it a step further and pose that question to its audience, its readers, listeners, and viewers, and ask them to weigh in and answer that question. And I think it would be fascinating to see the diverse and complicated responses that would come into that question. And then how can we embrace complexity when it comes to a number of the issues that we've been facing this year? And how can we put them into context? So we can do that by exploring some of these questions. Like, what did our election look like in relation to other elections around the world during this time of COVID? And what lessons can be learned from other countries in terms of the precautions that they took to ensure safe in-person voting? What causes post-election controversy and violence? Why does it happen? How other countries dealt with that? What are people frustrated about? What gives them hope? And how have other countries dealt with post-election violence, and in what ways can we learn from them? We can also ask, when was the last time we had protests of this scale in our town or in our city? And how do they compare? Is there a common thread? What are the differences? We can ask, what was the aftermath from those protests from 2 decades ago in our city? And is there ongoing work that we could learn from in relation to what it is that we're dealing with right now? So when we look at the same problem in a different state, a different city, state, or country, at a different time in history, that's a way to really revive curiosity. So in ourselves and also in our audience. And with that, I would like to introduce all of you, and I hope Smriti is with us. Smriti, are you here?
Yes, ma'am.
Beautiful. Okay, great. So I'd like to introduce you to Smriti Jacob. She is our lightning talk for you this afternoon for this session. And Smriti is the managing editor of the Rochester Beacon. And Smriti covers everything, literally everything from education, healthcare, to science and social justice issues. And police reform, defund police campaigns, those continue to be part of local conversations throughout the US and local towns and cities. It's also a part of the national conversation that's ongoing. And Smriti has been covering this issue when it comes to the local Black Lives Matter movement in Western New York. And she's been doing so from a complicating the narrative lens perspective. So Smriti, I was hoping that you could talk about how you've used these strategies, in particular, this pillar 3 with embracing complexity. And you've done it really in a way to show the nuances within the Black Lives Matter movement. And I just think that I would love for you to talk about this. We have your article on the screen right now, but the work that you've been doing to rebuild trust with local residents and law enforcement in our region.
Sure. For those who don't know, in Rochester, a man died in police custody. So in addition to the George Floyd incident that did bring out protesters in downtown Rochester, New York, this happened and we learned of it, and the protests took on greater fervor because it hit closer to home. And when I decided to do what Helen just said about A versus B, and I found a lot of stories were doing that, doing one point of view, another point of view, and presenting it to the readers. So the only assumption that I made was that people of color aren't a monolith. They can feel differently and have different opinions about the same issue. And that was one thing. The other thing that I saw that was interesting was the fact that elders had a different view about, bringing about change, and younger people had a very different view of demanding change. And this sort of likened to the time in the 60s when during the civil rights movement. So what I did was I talked to a number of people, and as I talked to them, again employing all that you've learned today, looping and listening, I I would peel off layer by layer. So I would find that, oh, what Elder A said resonates with the young person A, actually, but I had to find a way to sort of integrate all of that. And I found that they both wanted the same thing. Both groups wanted justice, wanted change. They just wanted it to be done differently. I found that elders that were actually proud of the young people who were marching, and young people looked to the elders for wisdom. And putting them as A and B was doing disservice to the conversation. It was far more complicated than that. So as I spoke with them, all that I did really was let them tell the story. And I juxtaposed both points of view so that the reader saw the commonality, saw that you really can't paint with one brush. And just because they were all asking for the same thing or protesting, it didn't mean that they all felt about it in the same way or wanted to go about it in the same way. Helen, is that
Yeah.
helpful?
No, that's awesome. I was wondering if you could share, because I know that you've shared this with me, but if you could share this with the group with us, kind of your process in terms
yeah.
of, and I love the way that you break it down and into these like kind of shutting down all the noise and that kind of a thing.
Yes. So when I went into this, I identified with the protests. I was very close, and I was just as angry and just as, I didn't know where I stood. I think I was in between the elders and the young people. But one thing that I did every time I went to I had 9 interviews, I think, for the story. I shut off everything I felt or thought or I had heard about person A or person B. I just thought of them in that moment, what they felt in that moment, and that I had never heard it before. And I went at it, because these people had talked to other media too. So I could use what they said in other media, but I chose not to do that. I just started like I didn't know anything, and that they had to tell me the story. They had to tell me why they felt the way they felt. And if they had a chance to talk to the other side, what they would tell them. And what do they see when the other side says X? And I did that with both parties. Some were more open, and some sources were more open and talked about it. Others weren't. And others were forceful and said, I disagree. But I could see that it was, I hope younger people took away that the older people had pride in them, and that the older people took away that they saw them as elders and they were wise. But again, it's complex, and feelings don't run in one smooth stream like that. So that was my process. I really made an effort to shut my own bias down and talk to people like I'd never met them before.
Great. Thank you. Anything else, Smriti, that you'd like to share about this work and finding multiple perspectives, historical viewpoints, anything at all?
Well, what this showed me that for everyone who's writing about these issues, there were nuggets of different stories within this story. So from this, I learned of that there was a neighborhood group that I did speak with the spokesperson, but I was curious later to find out how each person in the neighborhood group felt. Like, were they all on the same page? And because could I apply the same, in other words, could I apply the same strategy to talking to all those neighbors? Would they all really neatly line up? I doubt it. After doing this, I doubt that everyone lines up very neatly behind a spokesperson, or is it majority wins, you know? So there was that nugget. I saw that there was so much bonds that were formed between unlikely suspects. I could write a story about that. So this gave me several story ideas. And that's the beauty in doing a complex story, I think, is that you can get to dig deep and then dig deeper.
Mhm, mhm.
It's like a feed into a story feed.
Yeah.
And so I have a lot of work to do, basically.
Thank you, Smriti. Yeah, and
Of
one
course.
thing I see with your pieces, and you show that no person is one thing, and there is no blanket way to look at, you know, one group. And just really, I love how you have done that and explored the nuances within, and spent time knowing the individual and dropping preconceived assumptions, and as you said, just kind of shutting down the noise and being present with them and seeing what you discover, and allowing them to take you to a place that you weren't necessarily expecting from the beginning.
Yes, yes. And allowing them is key. You know, when you, Helen, when you talk about and teach us how to do this, you tell us to sort of, you know, not lead someone along, like you don't edge someone along. And that was so key to this, is that I didn't want to say, oh, really? Or I had to say, tell me more. Or, you know, so, or relate, even saying, oh, you know, I did this in XYZ time. Is it the same way? I didn't want to assume anything when I did this. And you know, sometimes we use, try to relate with sources so that they feel comfortable. I wanted them to be comfortable about what they were talking about without making them feel so.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Smriti, and thank you for the work that you're doing too.
Thank you, Helen.
Are there any questions for Smriti? If anything pops up, she'll be with us. So we'll check the chat if you have any questions for her. All right, it was great. Okay, so now we are ready for pillar 4, and this is our final pillar, which is focused on countering confirmation bias. So this will be with our sources, and also with our audience. And confirmation bias is something we all we all deal with. You know, when we favor information because it really does, it fits, it's evidence that fits in with our deeply held beliefs, and we just don't always want to take in any information that counters that. But our belief is that, you know, as journalists, if we want our listeners and readers and viewers to not dismiss the coverage that we're doing around these important issues simply because it doesn't fit or it doesn't harmonize with their pre-existing belief, their pre-existing narrative, then we need to find ways to counter confirmation bias in the course of doing our interviews, and also in the produced pieces that we publish and that we share. So here are strategies to help us do that. One is to use graphics. And we talk about using graphics in a way to show and not just tell factual information that may be quite hard for people to process or to believe. This might be information that they want to shut out or resist. And sometimes in doing it through a graphic, more so than to use the phrase force feeding it and putting it in text, or, you know, this is a way that they can kind of see something and start to come to their own conclusions about an issue. And the other way we talk about doing this, countering confirmation bias, is through hosting inclusive community convenings. So virtually for now, as we're doing now, but also, you know, convenings that eventually we can do within our communities and in person when that time comes that we can gather again. So I'm going to go through each one. And I want to first show you this example here from CNN. So this is one of several graphics that accompany a story about inequities when it comes to wealth, health, and opportunity between Black and white Americans. So for people who say, I don't think racial inequities are that severe in the US, and I think that the media is blowing this out of proportion, This graphic showing the median net worth of Black households, the median net worth of white households being about 10 times the median net worth of Black households. This right here, seeing it can help to correct misperceptions. So graphics can explain facts connected to issues that some might have a hard time believing. And when we do this, it helps our audience to consider information that they don't want to hear. We won't get people to change their minds with facts. We know that that doesn't just happen. People don't just change their mind when we present facts to them. But what we're saying is we can help them to consider information that might counter their beliefs, just to get them to consider it. And that can help. And sometimes when we incorporate data and facts in a graphic from an unexpected source, that can also help to drive this point home. So I think of like military data, US military data, for example, is sometimes an unexpected source that people might not expect to be incorporated in a story to help build context. And that can help to counter confirmation bias. So these are, there are a ton of different apps that you can use, but these are a few solid tools that are available, and they're free, based on the subscription that you have, and you can create infographics on the fly. So these are all some of the, these are the favorites that have been used and recommended by journalists that create infographics for web builds, for example, with some of the stories that they're doing. And then another way to counter confirmation bias is for journalists and newsrooms to be intentional about hosting dialogues and gatherings that incorporate, a diversity of viewpoints and bring people together. I'm talking about bringing people together across lines of difference. And there are a number of organizations that work with news outlets and journalists on these types of gatherings. So Spaceship Media, for one, does a fantastic job with this, whether it's in person, virtually, and then on their Facebook groups that they create for certain dialogues. And another is Local Voices Network. So those are two great resources. I'm sharing this with you because one of our partner newsrooms, Fun Times Magazine, based in Philly, they asked us to work with them on a virtual gathering, and it was focused on the diaspora disconnect. So we're talking about this unspoken and also spoken tension that exists between Black Americans, Africans, and Caribbeans in the US, but they wanted to focus on Philly and how they were dealing with this in the Philadelphia area. So through the Complicating the Narrative strategies, they organized a listening session, and they brought people together to help to understand the disconnect and how it personally impacts, or how it had personally impacted those who gathered. And then they're following up with a second session in January, doing these small virtual dialogues with small groups to personalize it even more. And then in small groups to talk through, now that we have a better understanding of how this directly impacts us as problem, are there opportunities for us to look for, to identify solutions when it comes to bridging this divide? And then here's another partner newsroom. This is the Laconia Daily Sun. And they brought together a few of their letter writers for a virtual gathering. And the goal for them really was to understand, why they write, why some of the letters are so charged and divisive, and together to kind of talk through ways that these letters moving forward can help improve civil discourse as a community. So those are two examples I wanted to share of newsrooms working to counter confirmation bias through intentional gatherings. All right, so that was a lot of information, as I mentioned. So I just want to do an ever so brief recap and then see if there are any questions before we close. But today you learned about Complicating the Narratives, and this is a project of the Solutions Journalism Network, and it really is focused on helping journalists produce more inclusive and nuanced reporting on contentious issues. And what CTN does is help provide, CTN, Complicating the Narratives, helps to provide more context and also understanding for our audiences. So we explored the 4 pillars of Complicating the Narratives, and then we'll go through each one. So Pillar 1 was focused on listening differently and how we can do that through the technique of looping. And then in pillar 3, we talked about going beneath the problem. And how do we do that? By asking different types of questions, curious questions that elicit some interesting responses to help paint a more accurate picture of a person. It's not about focusing on their positions, but understanding their motivations, their values, their interests. And then with pillar 3, we examined, what does it mean to embrace complexity? And we do that by looking at an issue that a community is dealing with, but looking at it from a different lens. So taking an issue that Smirti, examined is happening in Rochester and providing historical context to that issue. Another thing you can do is, look at it from a different geographic lens as well. What's happening here versus what's happening in LA or happening in Brussels, for example. And then finally, we talked about countering confirmation bias and the ways in which we can help our audiences do that. And one is through graphics, and especially using graphics from interesting and surprising sources. Then also through virtual and eventually in-person dialogues. We're talking about listening, discussion, and learning opportunities when newsrooms and communities are exploring complicated issues that they're trying to work through. And with that, I just want to make sure that you have this. So this is my email, and I want to make sure, we went through a lot. Please, please, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. And I mean that. I also, in the networking section, I've got a Calendly link. You can reach me here on my email, on any of the social media accounts, if you have any interest in kind of working through this a bit more, and setting up a one-on-one call. I am here for you, and I am more than happy to do that. I would actually love to do that. So please don't hesitate to let me know if there's more that we can talk through. So I don't know if there are any questions. I'm going to pop into the chat to see if there's anything. Yes, I'm going to save some of these so I can make sure. Audrey, if you are still on, can you email me? I'm scared that I'm going to lose the chat, and I want to make sure that I don't miss
yes, I will email you. Sorry, I think I hit send before you posted this.
Oh, no. That's all good.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And let's see, can you give other examples of complex narrative stories that you have noticed, and tell us about them? Yeah, okay, so I'm thinking, so for example, Alicia, and I don't know if I want to make sure I have the correct pronunciation, and I'll send some of these to you as well. And I'm going to figure out, sorry, this is a bit disjointed now because I really want to share in the chat these resources. But I will also send them to Tanya. I wonder, Tanya, if you're here, I'm going to see if I can send these to you. And maybe you'll be able. Nope. It's not letting me.
Post them later on the on-demand section. If you want to just email them to
Yes.
me, I can
Beautiful.
Everybody can access them there.
Okay, perfect. Sounds great. Thank you. So one example, there was a story, and I'll send this to you as well, that was done on the COVID stay-at-home order protests that were taking place around the country in the spring. And one journalist, Sabrina Tavernise, she was covering this for the Times, and she was covering the stay-at-home order protests in Michigan, and this was happening in Lansing. And I love how she said this. She said, I needed to figure out, I needed to find the most compelling arguments for why people would put their health at risk to drive from wherever they're coming from to be a part of this protest. And so she spent a lot of time, and she called it, I needed to get underneath the hood of the car and to explore, like, what are the nuances? Like, I need to understand why people are here. And I want to get underneath the hood of the car, not just stand back and look at the problem, but dig. And what she did was she found some really great interviews. And these were individuals who were protesting, and some were explicit in saying, I'm not here because of politics. I'm here because I feel as though, and there's this quote with this metaphor, which was so powerful from one of the sources. Like, I've got my mom, I'm dangling from a cliff, and I've got my mom on one side and my child on the other, and I'm being asked to choose one. And the way that he was explaining it was trying to choose between his health and his livelihood. And that's how he felt with these orders. Like, he had really, this was like really personal to him. And he was like, I'm so conflicted, and I understand the health risks. I'm not saying that the science is wrong. I'm not saying that this is not at risk. And I'm not acknowledging that people aren't dying from this, because I have people who work in healthcare and they're dealing with this, but I am struggling. And I don't know if politicians are really taking the time to see the ways in which this is impacting communities and community members and the very levels, the ways in which they are being affected. So she showed people, like the depth. She humanized them. There was an individual also that was part of this protest, and it was interesting because she showed how this person changed his mind, where at one point he was off 4 of these stay-at-home orders, and then with time, as time progressed, and as he thought the measures became too restrictive, he no longer agreed with them. So she was showing someone in process, and we don't often get to see that, how we all change our minds. I mean, there's a number of things that happen. We can, a conversation with someone can change our mind. We could personally experience something and it changes our mind. And I hadn't seen, in coverage, and I myself as a journalist don't recall, had I ever asked someone if they changed their mind about something and to show it. And that was also a really interesting way that there's the way she humanized people and showed them as in different the different layers of them. It was really fascinating. So that's an example. And I'm happy to send more too, just so you can kind of get a sense of them in different mediums. So I'll send a TV piece, a radio piece, and also a couple print pieces. And I'll send the link to Smirti's piece as well, so you can check that out. Okay, so I know that we are at time. And I will thank you so much, Tanya. I'll turn this, but thank you. This was awesome. And I'm so grateful. And to Smirti, thank you so much for joining us and for your brilliance and your knowledge that you shared. And Tanya, and to the Jaws family, thanks for doing this and making this happen for all of us these next few days. It's so important and we need it. So thank you.
And thank you for being here. That was amazing. And we'll have it on demand shortly.
Awesome. Okay, sounds good.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.